Have you changed your t-shirt to make it look like we're recording on a different day?
What do you mean?
That's hilarious.
No, I just took my jumper off.
We've got like a whole day of recording. And
I've just made editing.
And editing, yeah. And in the small break that we've just had, I've made myself what I call a child's lunch. And I've got a chickeny salad sandwich and some Crispies.
Nice.
Love it.
Well, I thought I'd be determined to wear a t-shirt, and I'm freezing.
I just said to Josie, I was like, it is freezing in here.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, it's not. Because I'm sitting in the kitchen and it's freezing in the kitchen. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah, Josie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to start the episode by just a quick I don't know, plea, beg. I don't know what it's going to be yet.
All right.
For anybody that listens to the podcast and loves listening to the podcasts and wants to listen to the extra episodes that we work so hard to create, you can do so by subscribing. It's $3 a month, and for people in the UK it's even less than that. It's £2, I don't know, 74, something like that it works out. And it means so much to us to get extra subscribers that listen to our Blam episodes. So if you can spare $3 a month, please subscribe to our little podcasts and you will get 2 extra episodes a month and a huge shout out from us. We love our podcast family and we want to be able to continue creating great episodes for everybody.
We do. We definitely do. So I kind of feel like, do you want me to put some like sad piano music over that? And like, we should both sit here looking like Labradors going, for just $3 a month.
Well, that's what we did last time, didn't we? We created an advert, but it sounded like a help us feed our family.
Oh yeah. Yes.
I made the sandwich at the wrong time. It's my episode and I've stuffed my face with chicken sandwich, so
you know this is on video as well.
Yeah.
So all our
someone on our YouTube channel watched one of our videos, I think probably just one of our videos, and commented and said, yawning during the podcast, how unprofessional.
Yeah.
She don't know the half of it.
No. Oh, I know. Clearly I'm
eating, drinking. What also she don't know is that we aren't professionals.
No.
So it's all right to be unprofessional.
Yeah. Not at any point did we say we're professional.
No. I'm going to yawn during a podcast because it's like a bedtime story. When Kate's talking, it lulls me into a sense of safeness and it makes me want to do a sleep.
Yeah. It's not actually that she's bored. I'll have you know. Even though she just walked off, left me on my own. I'm on my own. It's just us. Oh, she's back. Shh.
Look, I see. I've just had to run off. How unprofessional.
I know. I just said to the guys, I'm on my own at the moment because Sarah's just walked off.
Yeah, because the dog needed me. He was at the back door whiffing. I think he needs a poop. So had to let him out. How unprofessional of me.
Yep.
Right. Random blams. Go. And you can do yours first because I'm eating.
Well, I mean, mine's not going to be related to the episode. It doesn't pertain to the episode because I don't know what the episode is.
That's all right. I'll do mine first.
All right.
So my blam was I was looking it up because I'm quite interested. And you know when you're being strangled?
Yeah.
All the time. But you know when like people say they was either strangling someone or being strangled and then they passed out.
Yeah.
But then they would come to.
Yeah.
Well, that always intrigued me. So I did some Googling.
All right.
And it says when you're being strangled, it takes 10 seconds of strangulation before you become unconscious. Okay. Right. And I was thinking, Why though? Because I can hold my breath for longer than that.
That's true.
So here it is.
Right.
It's not the lack of oxygen that causes you to pass out. It's the pressure that's being placed on the jugular. So it's blocking the blood going to the brain, which is why it only takes 10 seconds for you to pass out. It is not the lack of oxygen. So when pressure is then released and blood flow returns, you can then come back out of that. But it's generally the lack of blood flow to the brain.
Do you know what? I don't think I've ever actually thought about that.
I know.
Amazing.
Blam.
Blam.
Have that. Blam.
Blam. You sent out the blam and I got the boom.
Boom. That's why. Because I was thinking, why do you lose consciousness after such a short amount of time? Because literally I can hold my breath for about 40 seconds. I had to, when I was having radiotherapy, 30 something seconds, I had to go and just hold my breath. And it turns out I can't hold my breath without keeping it in my cheeks.
Oh, okay.
So when I was having
you look like a Who from Whoville.
Yeah, when I had to hold my breath during the radiotherapy, I had to go, right, ready, and then just puff out my cheeks, and I must have looked ridiculous because I can't hold my breath without puffing out my cheeks, because that's where it's being held, right there.
Yeah, none in your lungs, just all in your cheeks.
Yeah, all
like
in my cheek. Yep. So, but yeah, that's my blam.
Cool. My blam is very random of the random blams. But did you know that a single litter of kittens can have more than one dad?
What? It's bans today, honestly.
I know.
That's not a whore cats going about.
Yeah. But they just one litter. So the same litter, and they can have different dads.
Wow.
Crazy.
No, I didn't know that. That is crazy. Yeah. Didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I think that happens to people back in Essex.
Yeah, I know.
To women.
Yeah. I was going to say something then, but I thought you were going to go.
Yeah.
I hope you guys appreciate that I say so many things that I find are funny, and I know Sarah finds funny, but they're so inappropriate that Sarah reins me in. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I get this from Sarah. As I say something and I'm sitting there going, chuckling away, I get Sarah go, just shakes her head, and then eventually she'll go, you can't say that, Kate. And I go, all right, I'll edit it out.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Some things are a small bit close to the mark, and I think we have quite a broad audience. I don't want to offend anyone. Yeah. But for those who do appreciate our sense of humour, I'm sure Kate will release everything that she's had to cut out episode.
I don't know. I think that would be at the end of our last episode where we're like
after the musical.
Yeah.
Right. Random blams done.
Done. Bought some cherryade.
Are you 7?
Apparently. I thought, do you know what? I haven't had cherryade and limeade. Me and my sister used to get when we used to go around my nan's in Hornchurch, and we used to get it off the milkman that used to come round, and he used to do it in those, like, it was called Corona. I know, sensitive now, but it was called Corona, and they just had like these long glass pointy bottles that had all like bubbles on the side, like the old Lucozade bottle had bubbles on it, and there was like cream soda, lemonade, cola, cherryade, limeade, and we always used to get either cream soda, limeade, or cherryade. So when I was in the shop the other day, me and Lou were like walking around getting some shopping and that. Claire was at work, so it's like all the rules are off. So I was like, let's get loads of different ice cream and like loads of different stuff, and we'll make our own ice cream sundaes. And the kids were like, yes. And I was like, yes. And then I was like, oh my God, cherryade, let's get some of that as well. So we just got all this like horrible, really bad for us shit. And came back. And I said to the kids, I was like, do you want some cherryade? And they were like, cherryade? What's that? And I was like, oh my God. Right, cherryade. And I sent Claire a picture. I was like, look, we're having a lovely time, and the kids have made ice cream sundaes and that. And she showed it, and she was like, gee, she sent me all in capitals, Jesus Christ.
Whoopies.
Look at the size of those bowls. And I was like, yeah, but they did it themselves. So
yeah, but they enjoyed it. They had fun.
I was like, I liked it. Yeah, by then, like, I don't know, by about 11 o'clock, the kids, I think, were still laying in their bed. They were both asleep, but they were both like laying there,
buzzing
with their hands on their bellies. And I was like, oh, they went to sleep with tummy ache. But
yeah.
that was a good night.
Right. So this episode is Survivor Tales. And it's only just occurred to me that I've done quite a few Survivor Tales in the past. And I love listening to people's stories of how they survived in certain situations. You know, I've done Juliana Kopke, who fell 10,000 feet from the sky.
2
landed
miles.
In the what?
2 miles.
Yeah, landed in the jungle and then survived until she found a way to rescue. Aaron Ralston, who literally had to cut his arm off to survive. The girl with no name, you know, she was just a child. She had to survive in the jungle. She survived by copying monkeys and their behavior. And I think that this, you know, we discussed it in the last episode with this instinctual drive to survive and what a person is capable of doing in order to survive really, really perplexes me. Because, like, if you speak to Aaron Ralston, he says, never. I was not the person that would have cut my arm off before his accident. If you'd have said to him, if you was trapped between a boulder, what would you do? Cut your arm off or, you know, die? He wouldn't have been able to do it. But in those instances, I don't think you know what you're capable of. So these are just a few short stories of people that have survived.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. Let's roll the titles. Good morning.
Morning. Morning, everybody. Welcome if you were just listening to your first episode, or whether you've listened to the first episode and then all of the other ones since. Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
And thank you for sticking with us, because we are knobheads. So I'm going to dive right into this episode.
Let's go.
So the first episode is a story of survival by Michalina Lewandowski. And I apologise if I keep getting the name wrong or if I say it differently. So 27-year-old Michalina Lewandowski had been happily engaged to her fiancé, and he was 25-year-old Marcin Kasperzak. And they had met in Poland in 2005. They lived together in Marcin's parents' home in Huddersfield in West Yorkshire after they moved from Poland in 2006. But after the birth of their son, Jakob, in 2008, the couple's relationship started to break down, and they actually called off the wedding. Marcin spent all of his time at the gym. He went 5 days a week. He was a really big, buff guy. There's a picture of him posing with his, you know, in a Arnold Schwarzenegger pose, and he's a really big, buff guy. And he became addicted to anabolic steroids. So he became prone to violent outbursts, and he soon came to hate his fiancée and saying that he would rather be with the much more attractive women that he'd met at the gym. And he wasn't shy about telling her that either.
Oh my God.
He wanted,
like, fuck off then.
He wanted the single man life. He wanted his mum to raise their son Jakob, and for Michalina to be out of his life. So he came up with a plan. On May 28th, 2011, Marcin told Michalina that he wanted to spend the evening with her out shopping. And she was excited by this notion. You know, up until that point, the couple were living together, but were hardly speaking. And so she was happy to have this almost foot in the door to try and get their relationship back on track, especially for their son. She'd always believed that they would be able to work out their problems, and had continued to wear her engagement ring as a sort of symbol of, I guess, hope that they would be able to sort things out. So that evening, she started getting ready in the bathroom, applying her makeup and putting on her best clothes, when Marcin walked in and stood in the doorway with his best friend, who was 18-year-old Patrick Boris. So she looks over at her fiance, who she'd loved him, you know, from when they first met in 2005. There'd been a period of time where she was besotted with him. You know, they'd become engaged, and he'd now become very cold and very callous towards her. And as she looked over to him, stood in the doorway of the bathroom, she noted that he had this wicked grin on his face. And he told Michalina that he wanted to show her something. And before she could think about what was happening, Marcin produced a 300,000 volt stun gun and
Jesus
jabbed
Christ.
it. Yeah, it didn't mess about, and jabbed it into her neck. So her body convulsed violently, and with all of his strength, Marcin threw Michalina to the floor, you know, as though she weighed nothing. Compared to his body weight, and he continued to deliver this 300,000 volts into her body.
Bloody hell.
He pinned her to the floor with his knee, and Patrick looked on as Michalina screamed in agony, and Marcin was shouting at her through her screams and telling her how much he hated her and how him and their son would be better off without her. And she cried, you know, she was terrified, and she cried out and said, and asked him if he was going to kill her, but he simply replied that he just wanted to take her somewhere. So Marcin and Patrick covered Michalina's mouth with parcel tape and bound her hands and feet tightly together. They then dragged her into the hallway, where Marcin used the stun gun on her again.
Oh, for God's sake.
Barely conscious, Michalina laid in the hallway for 6 hours, trying to stay calm, trying to stay conscious. She was scared that if she closed her eyes, that she might never be able to reopen them again. And she could hear the two men talking and laughing and joking together in the other room, before she kind of heard them coming back towards her, talking about getting a plastic bag. So she feared that they were going to use this plastic bag to suffocate her. However, the next thing she knew was the men grabbed her by her wrists and one by her ankles, and then they stuffed her into this large cardboard box. And she tried to fight the men, but they were both like big buff men. They were far too strong for her. And Marcin grabbed the parcel tape once more and sealed the box tightly shut, you know, round and round and round and round with this parcel tape. With hardly any wiggle room in this box, Michalina couldn't use her arms or legs to kind of stop him from closing it. She had no leverage to really move. The two men then carried the box with Michalina inside, threw it into the back of their car, and then they drove her to a remote wooded area. Once the car finally came to a stop, the two men unloaded the cardboard box containing Michalina and then dragged it over all the hard rocks and the tree roots through into the woods, like into the depth of the woods. They threw Michalina into a grave that they had already dug, and then proceeded to fill it in with soil that they had excavated from the hole. From within the box, Michalina could hear the sounds of the soil hitting the top, and she screamed through the tape across her mouth, but her voice soon grew hoarse. So the two men packed the dirt tightly around the box and over the box, covering it with a good 6 inches of heavy soil. And for good measure, the two men dragged a 40-kilogram tree trunk and left it across the grave that they had just buried Michalina alive in. and it completely trapped her in this underground tomb.
Oh, it's
The
hideous.
two men's voice started to grow quiet, and Michalina was resigned to the fact that, you know, this is where she was going to die, alone in complete darkness, no one but her murderers knowing where she was and what had happened to her. But that isn't how she wanted to die. She didn't want to leave her son without his mother. The thought of never seeing him again was too much to bear. So as she waited for the sound of the car to drive away, she started trying to figure out what she was going to do. But that sound never came. She never heard the car drive away. She didn't know whether that's because they hadn't driven away or whether it was because she was too far away from the car to hear it. So she didn't want to run the risk of escaping only to be caught by her captors again. So she began to even out her breathing, trying to calm herself. She was worried about the possibility of suffocating before she even had a chance to try and escape. So she was bound tightly by the wrists and the ankles and contorted into fitting into this cardboard box. You know, how on earth was she going to try and free herself when she could barely move? Then the idea hit her. She had something on her person that could help. And ironically, it was the one thing that was supposed to symbolize love. And she would now use it in a situation that was full of hate. Using the tips of her fingers, she carefully slid her diamond engagement ring off her finger and used the sharp edge of it to cut through the tape that bound her wrists together. Brilliant. It was incredibly slow going, but she finally managed to free her hands. She then used the same technique to free her ankles, and then with her hands free, she whipped the tape off across her mouth. Her chest was getting tight from the lack of oxygen, but she did not give up. She slipped the ring back on her finger and began to attack the cardboard box above her head. But confined within this box, there was no room for her to kind of get any force to swing her arm up or, you know, do any damage to the box. So she was punching it, scratching it, clawing it, using her ring to try and cut through it. Eventually, the cardboard started to give way. But then there was another problem. The soil began to trickle through onto her face, into her eyes, her hair, and her mouth. And she was losing her energy from fighting so hard against the cardboard and the lack of oxygen as well. But she continued to batter away at the box until the hole was actually big enough for her to put her hand all the way through. So she began to then clear away some of the soil that was on top of the box, pushing it out of the way as much as she could so that it wouldn't continue to fall in. She eventually had a hole big enough for her to fit her head through. So holding her breath, she pushed her head out of the box and then wiggled it through the 6 inches of compacted soil until she felt the cool air on her face. She took in a giant lungful of fresh air and then looked around sort of like really sharpishly to see if Marcin and Patrick were still around. The rest of her body was still trapped underground in this box. So with her remaining energy, she managed to claw her body the rest of the way out, using her arms as leverage to then kind of drag her body and legs the rest of the way out of the soil. She was completely exhausted. She had been buried alive and then fighting for her freedom for over an hour. But her fight wasn't over yet because she was in the middle of a wooded area and it was pitch black and she had no idea where she was. But in the distance, she could hear music. So she knew she wasn't massively far from civilization. So she stumbled away from her grave and began walking to where she eventually found a road and then flagged down a passing car. All too often, you hear these sorts of stories where they're trying to flag down a car for help, but then the car kind of sees the person and goes, oh, that's not for them. That's not for me. And they're either scared about stopping, you know, or they don't want to help. I don't know. But luckily, this car did stop. So covered in dirt, like completely filthy, shaking and weak, the man listened to Michalina explain what she'd just been through, and he quickly phoned the police. The police arrived within 15 minutes, and Michalina walked them back through the wooded area to the grave that she'd just clawed her way out of. Now, there's a picture of this grave and then the shredded box, and she'd actually taken off some of her clothing as well to be able to better fit, I think, through.
Yeah.
Because I think she couldn't actually go directly above her because the log was there. So she had to kind of go out at an angle.
Yeah, sort of round
the log. So the police saw all of this, and they listened to her story, and it didn't take them long to track down Martin, and then they arrested him for attempted murder of his fiancée.
Good.
And he didn't deny any of the attack. He only said that his intentions hadn't been to murder Michalina, but to scare her. He claimed that he was actually going to go back and then just let her out.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I smell bullshit.
I smell it too.
And so did the police, because
Good.
the brutality of the attack and the fact that she had been left gagged and bound with this heavy tree over the top as well. It wasn't just a scare tactic. The police also learned that after Martin and Patrick had buried her, they took her bank card and then went and withdrew the maximum amount of cash that you could do from a cash point, which was, I mean, for me, it's 300 quid, but they said it was 500 quid. So after a lengthy trial, Martin was found guilty of attempted murder and kidnapping and sentenced to 20 years. His accomplice, Patrick, was found guilty of kidnapping and then sentenced to 5 years. Although Michalina survived, she was always terrified of the day that Martin is released from prison, because she just feared that he was going to come back and try and finish the job.
Absolutely.
But her sheer determination to survive, being buried underground, really incredible. But it just goes to show that I just don't think, if you were in a situation, like if you went to an escape room and you were in a hypothetical situation, I don't think you'd be like, oh, I know, I'll take my ring off and I'll use my ring.
No, I think it's definitely where fight or flight comes in, isn't it? You know, it's like, if you imagine that you walked out on your drive and there was suddenly, you know, a dark figure standing in the shadows, and you suddenly noticed it, you know, you might sort of say, oh, if that happened, I'd be useless. I'd just collapse on the floor and, you know, be screaming and crying and all that. But in reality,
you'd do something
you
very
probably
different.
wouldn't. You'd probably sort of run to the front door, or, you know, possibly even run at them. You know, you don't know until you're in that situation. You don't know what you're going to take it to in order to survive.
Well, this next story is quite a similar thing. He made a very split-second decision that saved his life. And this next story is my worst nightmare. You know, Kate, you're squeamish when it comes to blood and gore or bones breaking.
Yeah.
But when it comes to water, I just can't deal with it. It makes my insides itch. When he was telling that story of the man that was locked inside the cabinet and pulled the water thing down, and then the cabinet started filling with water, I was like,
get me out.
Oh God, I just can't. The thought of drowning, or being in a space where the water's filling up and you know it's inevitable, I can't. It makes me really squeam. So this next story is it was hard for me.
Squirmy for you.
Yeah, Josie listened to the Bone Breaker episode and she just rung me up and she went, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, why? She was like, but are you okay? I don't know how to feel about the fact that you can just research these episodes and be okay.
Yeah. What she was actually saying was, you are not okay.
What's wrong with you?
What the hell's wrong with you?
That's it. I'm not squeamish when it comes to things like that. Not squeamish, but these ones that involve water and things. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you should have seen Claire when we went whale watching, and there were some big waves, and a really, really big wave hit this medium-sized kind of boat, and everything, like, it made the most incredible bang, all the glasses and cutlery like shot off the side and smashed. All the lights went out. The engine stopped. Everything. I have never seen that side of Claire. She was absolutely beside herself, and I was like, "It's fine. Like worst case scenario, we're going to end up in the water."
Yeah, that's my worst case scenario.
I was like, "That's fine for her." She was like, "What?
Well, she can't swim. That's why."
Can now.
Oh, can she?
But yeah, she was like, "Oh my God, what's happened? What's happened?" And I was like, "It's just a big wave that's hit, and like it's fine. We'll just reset, turn everything back on, and get going."
No.
She was like, "Oh my God." Yeah.
I'll tell you this story, okay? So this is the story of Harrison O'Kenny. So Harrison O'Kenny was 29 and working as a cook on Jaskin 4, which was a tugboat that was assisting an oil tanker about 20 miles off the coast of Nigeria.
Gotcha.
I think there was quite a few tugboats and they were trying to keep this oil tanker in line or something like that. They were there to support it.
Okay.
On the morning of the 26th of May, 2013, Harrison, he's such a lad. Harrison had gotten up, said his prayers as he did every morning, and then headed to the galley to turn on the hot plates for breakfast. He hadn't even gotten dressed yet, and he was wearing just his boxers. As he turned on the hot plates, he decided to use the toilet. He went into the toilet in his boxers, and while he was in the toilet, unbeknownst to him, a freak wave, giant wave, hit the tugboat and capsized it, like upside downy boat. Harrison was thrown off the toilet and in a moment was standing on the ceiling with the toilet up above his head. The tiny room immediately began to fill with freezing cold water. But he didn't panic. He'd been trained for these sorts of moments. So he reached for the toilet door and he tried to pry it open. It was an outward door, but the torrent of water pouring in was pressing hard against it, pinning it shut. Goodness. The toilet then fell from the ceiling. It hit him on the head, and he had just enough time to register the blood pouring from his head before all the lights went out. Everything in the boat became pitch black. And after a minute or two, with the water level still rising, Harrison felt the boat hit the bottom of the ocean floor, which is 100 feet below the surface. Oh. The water was rising up around him, but the pressure inside the boat had started to equalize, so he was now able to force the toilet door open. Out into the main corridor, it was pitch black. He didn't know which way was up. All he knew was that he had to move. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could kind of make out his crewmates, and they were desperately trying to open the escape hatch. But the torrent of water that was pouring into the boat was knocking everyone back into their rooms. So Harrison made the decision to turn away from the exit hatch and look for another route out. And it was this decision that saved his life as he swam further into the boat. So where Harrison was at the very back of the boat, and it was kind of pitched at an angle, almost like the Titanic. It was kind of upended, and he was at the back of the boat where the escape hatch was. So he swam further into almost like the middle where of the boat. But as he swam, the force of the water coming in knocked him into another toilet. But this one was like an ensuite to the second engineer's cabin. The water then, as it knocked him in, shut the door closed behind him. And the water level began to rise dangerously. But then it stopped, with pretty much his entire body submerged in this freezing water with just his shoulders and head remaining out. Ooh. He realised that he was caught in an air pocket. So being stationed on the coast of Africa, the threat of pirates was actually very real. So the boat's security measure meant that every single door had to be kept shut. So with every door shut and the boat capsized, there was some air that had been caught in the doors. So while this was good security measure for the threat of piracy, what it actually did was to slow down many of his colleagues as they tried to escape from the boat. But locked in his toilet, he could hear his fellow crewmates outside shouting and crying, and then soon becoming quieter and quieter.
Oh no.
Hoping that they had actually escaped instead of fearing the worst. Harrison tried to open the door that led out of the toilet and into the engineer's cabin. From there, he was going to then try and make his way out of the engineer's cabin and back towards the escape hatch. He assumed that his crewmates had got it open, and that's what he was heading for. But in his panic, he actually broke the door handle that led from the toilet into the cabin. So then he looked around in this little tiny toilet, and he managed to find a vent. And he broke a piece of the vent off and then used it to pry the door open. Inside the cabin, there was another air pocket. The air pocket extended into that room as well. So although it was full of water, there was enough space for him to keep his head out of the water and to breathe. But like I say, the ship, as it hit the ocean floor, it was at an angle. So Harrison was in a point where the air pocket was, that was kind of at the back end of the boat.
Yeah.
So in this room, there was an air pocket at the top, but further into the room, the water got deeper and deeper and deeper. So as he ventured further into the cabin to go out of the door and find the exit hatch, it was completely submerged. So he was having to hold his breath to try and reach the hatch, but he couldn't hold it for that long. So he eventually had to escape back into the safety of this air pocket that was in this cabin, or in the toilet that he'd been in. Meanwhile, rescue boats had been deployed straight away. The capsizing of Jackson 4 had been witnessed by all the other tugboats that were nearby in the area. So boys were dropped, not actual boys, but boys.
Little boys were dropped in the water.
Yeah. Where the ship had sank, to kind of mark where that ship had sank so that divers could come out and then look for survivors.
Mm-hmm.
However, the divers weren't equipped to reach the depths of the seabed because of the pressure. So they only went down kind of halfway to listen out for survivors, but the search was called off after half an hour because it was deemed that there was no survivors. You can't survive underwater for half an hour. So the search was called off. But Harrison remained in this air pocket with more than half of his body submerged in the freezing cold water, alone and in complete darkness for 3 days. During that time, he was haunted by the banging of objects against the hull, the sounds of fish eating his crewmates that had drowned, the stench of his crewmates' body as it decomposed in the water. His tongue and his throat were burnt red raw, and the skin had started to peel off due to the salt water that he had ingested on his trips out to find the exit hatch and things. He had cuts and bruises where furniture was banging into him, and obviously the injury from the toilet. He also had crawfish that was trying to eat away at his flesh as it was submerged under the water. He had no sense of time. It was just complete darkness. So when he next heard what he thought was an anchor dropping, he assumed divers had come to recover the body. So he banged as loudly as he could on the walls in a last desperate attempt to be saved. Meanwhile, divers had begun their rescue mission. They were instructed to retrieve the bodies and bring them ashore. The upside-down tugboat had come to rest in a very silty, muddy part of the ocean floor. So not only was it dark down there, it was dark, like murky and sludgy. So even the divers were disorientated. They entered the ship through the escape hatch that the crew had been so desperately trying to open. And the divers had a camera attached to this headgear. So, and there was an instructor on the ship that was on the surface, and he was watching the camera so that he could kind of instruct the divers in which rooms to go in. The divers recovered 10 bodies. And then as one diver squeezed past all the debris and everything like that, he saw in front of him a very pale hand just kind of floating in the water. Kind of coming towards him. It was very, very pale. And you see it on the camera. There's a video of it. And then this pale hand grabs the diver. And you hear on the video the instructor above going, "Oh my God, it's a survivor, it's a survivor." And the diver kind of pops up out of the water, sees Harrison, and he's stood in this little air pocket. And the instructor's saying to him, make sure he's okay, calm him down, tell him everything's going to be okay, you know, talk to him, reassure him. And Harrison's just stood in this air pocket, just not really knowing what's going on.
It must have been freezing.
I'll tell you in a minute. They checked him out and made sure he was okay before putting on this breathing apparatus, and then they're making their way out of the boat. But this rescue had kind of come right on time. Although Harrison was in an air pocket, it wasn't an unlimited amount of air. There was they worked out how much air was in this little 4 meter of space, and they worked out that air would have lasted him 2.5 days, and he'd now been down there for 3 days. So after he's breathing in all of this air, he's replacing this air with carbon dioxide. So if he'd have been in there any longer, he actually would have suffocated. He wouldn't have drowned. He would have suffocated. And the divers actually described Harrison as delirious, breathing incredibly shallow, and he was suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning.
Jeez.
But Harrison had spent 3 days at the bottom of the ocean at pressures that no one should have been able to survive for 3 days. Divers, even going down, are only allowed down there for 20 minutes before coming up. And if they come up too fast, they get the bends.
Yeah.
Which is, I believe, I didn't Google it, but I believe it's little tiny bubbles of nitrogen that build up in the bloodstream. And if you come up too fast, I think they burst, something like that. And it could cause a lot of issues. But so then he had to spend a further 3 days in a recompression chamber for his body to get used to the pressure, the atmospheric pressure above the sea level where he was at. But when the doctors checked over Harrison, unbelievably, all of his vitals were normal. His body temperature was normal. His blood pressure, his heart rate, everything was normal. And it was like his body had adapted to being underwater in the freezing temperatures.
Wow.
It just then began to regulate itself. He remains the only person to ever survive that long underwater at that depth.
Jesus. So did he say that he was like freezing, or he was just like, let's get out of here?
He didn't say that he was cold or anything like that. So what he'd done was he managed to rip some paneling off the wall of the ship and then use it to prop half of his body up so he wasn't completely submerged. So he had half of his body out. I say half, it was kind of just his chest and his head. And the rest of his body underwater. But yeah, his skin had adapted to being in the water for that long. You know, in your episode where he was trapped in the wardrobe, his skin started to like slip off and stuff.
Yeah, sliding off. Yeah.
I don't know whether perhaps because this was salt water, it was different. I don't know. But...
I think in my one, it was more because it was like a torrent of water. Okay. You know, so it was like almost like it would be eroding something away by but yeah, I suppose it'd be slightly different if you were just in kind of
left in water for 3 years. If I'm in a bath for half an hour, I'm wrinkly AF.
Yeah, you go well pruny, didn't you? Pruny, but yeah, he was probably very considerably.
He was pruny. Very. You see the hand in the water in the YouTube video. You can see it, and it is incredibly white and
pruny,
very, very wrinkled. Yes. Okie dokie. So the last story of survival is the story of Mary Vincent. And I came across this episode and I was like, holy hell.
I nearly did this as one of mine.
Did you?
Yeah.
Do you know this story?
I do.
Holy hell. It's not quite long enough to have as a main story because I was going to do the same.
It's a great story of survival.
So in 1978, Mary Vincent was 15 years old. She was somewhat of a troubled teen. She didn't get along with her parents. She often skipped school and had eventually run away with her boyfriend when her parents got divorced. After spending some time living on the streets or inside cars with her boyfriend, he was then arrested for raping another girl and sent to prison.
Oh, God.
So Mary decided to go to her grandfather's house in Berkeley, California, and she stayed living with him for some time before growing homesick. And in September 1978, she decided she wanted to go back to her parents' home in Las Vegas. So while traveling back, she began to do what was very normal in the 70s, and she began hitchhiking for a ride. And it was this decision that would change her life forever. She flagged down 50-year-old Lawrence Singleton. He welcomed her into his car, but she immediately felt like something was wrong. She immediately had this sense that she'd made the wrong decision. And at some point in the journey, she'd sneezed. And Lawrence asked if she was sick. And he kind of put his hand on the back of her neck as a reassuring gesture. And Mary kind of put her at ease a little bit. You know, he was caring. He was kind to her. So it put her at rest enough that she actually fell asleep. So when she woke up, she noticed that they were driving in the wrong direction. And Mary she didn't panic, but she said to him, you know, you're going the wrong way. And he said, I hold my hands up. Honest mistake. You know, I've gotten confused. I've lost my bearings. And he turned the car around and proceeded in the correct direction. But Mary grew uneasy. A while later into the trip, Lawrence pulled over to the side of the road for a bathroom break. And Mary got out of the vehicle also to stretch her legs. And she noticed that her shoelace was undone, so she bent down to tie it. Lawrence came up from behind her and hit her over the head with a sledgehammer.
Oh, my God.
Now, there's something so awful in hearing that someone has taken a hammer to the head. I just can't even bear the thought of taking a hammer to the head, but this was a sledgehammer.
Oh, God, it just seems so unnecessarily over the top, brutal.
Yep. How she survived that alone is shocking, but it merely rendered her unconscious.
Nearly.
And when she came to, Lawrence had her tied up in the back of his car and began to viciously rape her multiple times over the course of a few hours. He told Mary that he would kill her if she screamed. So instead, she begged him to let her go. And he suddenly said, "You want to be free? I'll set you free."
Oh, God.
He grabbed a small hatchet from the floor of his car and swung it savagely at her, cutting off both of her arms just below the elbow. He pushed her body down a steep embankment and then stuffed her inside a concrete pipe before saying, "Okay, now you're free." He turned his back on her and began walking calmly back up the embankment to his car, and he left her for dead. But Mary didn't die. Naked, bleeding, and falling in and out of consciousness, she dipped her bleeding stumps into the mud and dirt to slow the bleeding, and then holding them above her head, she clambered back up the steep embankment to Interstate 5, where she had just been savagely attacked. She then walked for 3 miles before a car stopped to help her. Others had slowed down, had seen her, had driven away, scared of the situation or just unsure of the situation. I don't know. But the car that did stop for her bundled her straight into the back and sped her to the nearest hospital. She underwent life-saving surgery where surgeons removed parts of her leg in order to graft skin onto her arms. After her recovery, Mary was able to provide such a detailed description of Lawrence to authorities that he was quickly identified based on the sketch, and he was arrested. And Mary testified against him in court. And as she left the stand, reportedly, Lawrence whispered to her, "I'll finish this job if it takes me the rest of my life."
Oh, scumbag.
Lawrence was found guilty of rape, kidnapping, and attempted murder. However, he served just over 8 years in prison and was released on parole for good behaviour.
Oh,
what a good boy!
Jesus
What a
Christ.
good boy!
Oh, good boy. Off you go. Do it again.
From that, and that's exactly what he did.
No.
From that point on, Mary lived her life in fear, and she was so worried that Lawrence would follow through on his promise. But he didn't finish the attack on Mary. However, he did go on to murder someone else.
Oh.
But that's a story for another day.
Oh, mate.
Mary suffered horrendously after the attack. She suffered PTSD, flashbacks. She actually said that she had come to some harm because of her PTSD. She'd broken her nose, broken some ribs, because where she'd be like asleep and dreaming that this happened, she would jump up and she would like hit herself on things, and because it was just so violent, these flashbacks. And she was unable to cope with life without the use of her arms. She was 15 when that happened. Eventually, Mary discovered art, and it helped her cope with the trauma of what she'd been through. But she couldn't afford to buy high-end prosthetic arms, so she created her own, using parts from refrigerators and stereo systems.
Yes, my girl.
What? And she taught herself to draw and to paint using these new-fashioned arms. Before the attack, she said that she couldn't even draw a straight line. She was terrible at art. But if you look at it now, it is fantastic. Her art is incredible. She said that it's something that kind of ignited in her after the attack. And she's also gone on to set up a charity in her name that helps victims of violent crime.
Wow. What an amazing story of like fight rather than
determination.
Yeah, that will to survive, and like, oh, my arms have just been cut off, so I'm going to get the stumps and dip them in the dirt to stem the bleeding while I hike up the top of this hill.
Yeah. And
I genuinely think I'd just lay there.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You kind of either go, oh my God, this is my life now. And if you don't make those split-second decisions, then, if she had kind of procrastinated about what to do, she would have bled out and died. But I think she immediately went, stumps in the dirt, up you go, look for help. Do you know what I mean? It's not, if you lay there going, oh, what should I do? What should I do? Do I want to live without my arms? I've just been savagely raped and attacked, and
Jesus.
It's crazy. And for a 15-year-old to go, no, this is what I'm going to do. And she walked 3 miles.
I know.
I can't even walk 3 miles.
No, I wouldn't even walk 3 miles.
That's a long.
God, that is incredible, isn't it? That when it comes down
about
to
an hour and a half.
When it comes down to it, just remember Mary and think, come on, stumps in the dirt. Let's do this.
That's going to be my motto now. When you've got to
stumps in the dirt.
When you've got to take the plunge, when you've got to do something you don't want to do, stumps in the dirt.
Let's make that a t-shirt.
Stumps in the dirt.
# stumps in the dirt. Let's do it. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah. But so there's so many of these incredible stories that there will be a part 2 and a part 3. There's so many of them.
It's nice to hear this side of it though, because
that's it. We do so many murder stories.
We see the horrible, dark, evil, wicked side of humans. So I think it's important when we see things like this and we think, do you know what? There's a lot of humans that are pretty cool and pretty awesome out there that just refuse to give in and just be like
prospered.
Yeah, we're on it. Stumps in the dirt.
Bang on, stumps in the
Yeah,
dirt, and crack
stumps in the
on.
dirt. Woo.
Yeah.
Oh, that
But
was
yeah.
wicked. Yeah, I feel motivated now
Yeah.
to just to get on.
Kick ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shove those stumps.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that. And
I did. I
yeah.
did. It was
Well, I'll see.
slightly uncomfortable
Right.
at times, but yeah, great.
I'll see
Great.
you on the next one.
Yeah. See you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun.